The most terrible disasters in the history of mankind. The exact death toll has not yet been determined. In 1908, brothers Orville and Wilbur Wright, who made the world's first airplane flight on December 17, 1903, could not have imagined the prospects of their own invention. Neither could they have imagined the risks that pilots and passengers would face. At the very beginning of airspace exploration, flights were accompanied by breakdowns and accidents. But airplanes were flown at relatively low altitudes, and pilots managed to get away with only minor abrasions and bruises. With the beginning of demonstration flights, in which spectators demanded from pilots higher altitudes and unusual maneuvers, the risk began to grow exponentially. On September 17, 1908, Orville Wright took a daring American lieutenant, Thomas Selfridge. In front of 2,600 spectators, the airplane made 3 circles, and on the 4th, a piece of the propeller fell off and the plane crashed to the ground. The severely injured Wright was saved, but Selfridge, crushed by the engine, died, becoming the first victim of the crash. The most terrible disasters in the history of mankind. The exact death toll has not yet been determined. The Soviet Union was the most closed country. Any data on emergency accidents was carefully concealed. Therefore, only researchers with access to the secret archives of the NKVD/KGB can name the exact number of victims of airplane crashes that occurred between 1917 and 1991. And they will not tell the truth because of secrecy. March 27, 1977 can undoubtedly be called a black day for aviation. Just imagine that in just 1 minute 583 people died, who had no idea that such a fate awaited them. This tragic event took place on the Canary island of Tenerife at Los Rodeos Airport. Initially, this airport was considered second in importance, with the bulk of airplane traffic being received at Las Palmas. However, it was closed due to the fact that recently there was a terrorist bombing organized by members of the Movement for Independence and Autonomy of the Canary Islands. Thus all planes were diverted to Los Rodeos, which physically could barely cope with such traffic. Airplanes were arriving every minute, flights were delayed due to the lack of landing strips, and the dispatchers did not have enough qualifications and a banal knowledge of English. Misunderstanding between pilots and dispatchers caused the fatal accident. The situation on the runways was as follows: the airplane of Pan American Airline was completely packed, with a total of 396 people on board. It was already ready for departure, but was blocked by a refueling vehicle and another flight. Accordingly, it had to stay put at the same time. A Dutch Boeing 747 KLM aircraft decided to refuel immediately at Los Rodeos so as not to waste time in Las Palmas. The excessive hurry of the commander of this vessel is explained by the fact that in the 70s there were strict rules for airlines to regulate the working day of employees. For this reason, the flight had to be finished either before 1900 hours or in the morning. The first option seemed more attractive. While the dispatchers were actively distributing instructions, the weather introduced its own adjustments. A thick fog descended on the airport. First visibility dropped to 300 meters, and then to 100 meters, which made it very difficult for the pilots to coordinate. The Dutch pilot received a command to proceed to the end of the main runway and turn 180 degrees, which he did. At the same time, the Boeing Pan American was instructed to follow the Dutch KLM and turn onto taxiway C3. The latter request could not be fulfilled because the runway was too narrow for a Boeing of that size, so the pilots concluded that they should turn off at the next turn. The inaudible Spanish accent of the air traffic controllers, poor communication quality and miscommunication between pilots and air traffic controllers caused Pan American and KLM pilots to start taking off simultaneously on the same runway. The KLM flight engineer expressed doubts about the correctness of the takeoff at that moment. However, both pilots were confident in the decision. After only 14 seconds, a serious collision occurred. The Pan American commander, having seen the aircraft at a distance of 700 meters, attempted to move left onto the taxiway, but there was insufficient time to do so. In the meantime, the KLM pilot sharply pulled the steering wheel towards himself, a maneuver that could have been successful if the Boeing had not been fully fueled. He managed to take off a few meters, and with the extended landing gear he cut through the top of the American plane, leaving several holes in the fuselage. It was thanks to them that 70 passengers out of 396 were able to get out. The KLM plane was much less lucky. The landing gear struts flew off and the plane, after flying 150 meters, fell to pieces. There was no one to rescue. Crash near Tokyo. On August 12, 1985, a Japanese airliner lost control 12 minutes after its takeoff, losing its vertical stabilizer. For 32 minutes, the crew fought to save the plane in mid-air, but the collision with Mount Atsutaka contributed to the devastating outcome. 520 people died and only 4 survived. The disaster is called the largest in the history of one airplane. Air crash near Paris. On March 3, 1974, a wide-body airliner built by a Turkish company killed 346 people. A few minutes after takeoff, the cargo compartment door suddenly opened. The explosive compression destroyed all control systems. The airplane picketed and crashed into a forest. An investigation pointed to a flawed locking mechanism in the compartment. Afterward, many airlines made changes to airplane designs to avoid catastrophic recurrences.